Councillor Mamalidi.
I asked the question already. Have things changed? Or is the plan still to put it above ground on Finch Avenue?
So the Metrolinx 5 and 10 plan, which evolved from the regional transportation plan, has the Finch corridor as an LRT. In the regional transportation plan, it went from Yonge Street to Humber College. In the Phase 1, the 5 and 10 plan, it goes from Keele, which is the Spadina subway, over to Humber College. So the answer is it's an LRT at grade.
So there was petitions that very clearly said that the Metrolinx plan puts it underground where it should be, but not on Finch Avenue. Finch Avenue stays above ground.
So in all the work that's been done over the last 5 years with TTC, the City of Toronto, and Metrolinx, the recommendation has always been to have LRT on Finch at grade.
Why can't the residents in the north end of the city have a subway like they deserve?
So from
some people find it funny, but you know the suburbs, they actually want a subway along Finch Avenue.
And you're not giving them one.
So from a planning principle perspective, a subway is not warranted. The peak demand in 2031 is about 3,000 customers per peak direction per hour, and that's not does not warrant consideration for a subway.
So based on the subway that's being built up to Vaughan, have you done any studies or calculated the amount of residents that might be moving into that quadrant after that subway is built?
So there was a lot of work done for many years for the planning to do with the Toronto-York-Spadina subway extension, and there was even some a benefits case analysis done to get federal funding. I don't have any numbers with me to articulate the number of people that would benefit from the subway, but a lot of work was done to defend the actual building of that subway extension.
Has the TTC ever been into any discussions to talk about public-private partnerships along Finch Avenue to secure a subway?
No, we've been in no discussions with anybody about a subway along Finch Avenue. We've had many discussions with Metrolinx in the province of Ontario to talk about the financing, the project delivery of the 5 and 10 plan, which is the Metrolinx LRT plan, with regards to the private sector, and a significant portion of the 5 and 10 plan, which is the LRT plan, if it's built, would include the involvement of the private sector in partnerships for aspects of that line that actually makes sense to be built by the private sector.
Finch Avenue?
Pardon me?
Finch Avenue?
No, Finch Avenue was not part of that.
That's my question. Why not? If we're in discussions with other lines and talking about the possibilities of public-private partnerships, what's wrong with Finch Avenue? What's wrong with the people that live north of the city?
So there's nothing wrong with Finch Avenue or the people that live in that area. When we examined the 5 and 10 plan, we looked at the aspects of that plan that we thought best suited the partnership, alternate financing, and procurement of the private sector. So the complete reconstruction and rebuilding of the SRT makes sense as an AFP, as a private sector. All of the yards make sense as an AFP. The inline station should be done by design build, which can be done by the private sector depending on how it's packaged. So there's a significant amount of the 5 and 10 plan that can be built and packaged to a third party through an alternate financing and procurement. Aspects of the plan, like the tunneling itself, should be design, bid, build, so we actually control and get that asset built the way it should be built.
The TTC just does not want to venture into any discussions that talk to the private sector about building a subway along Finch Avenue. There's no room for discussion there, is there?
Everything that is in play with Metrolinx in the province has not been finalized. We've had much discussions about the plan, as I just said. Our view is there's aspects of the plan that make more sense to be done by the private sector. Finch wasn't one of those. No decisions have been made on that. The Commission brought a report forward, staff did, to its meeting in January the 31st to indicate where we were, but those discussions are ongoing.
So if you were a local councillor who represented an area like mine and your residents have said to you, why do we have to accept an LRT and others are getting a subway? How would you respond to those
Last question.
I would respond by saying that a lot of planning work has been done to determine what the appropriate mode is to serve that area, and I would say that the LRT is the appropriate mode for the demand.
Thank you. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Webster, I'd like to focus on a different perspective for a moment, and that is, let's look at the Eglinton line as proposed and where there is agreement. That is to say, the portion of the Eglinton LRT that is to be below grade from Laird to Black Creek. What is the amount of time that's projected to have that completed?
So we're just about ready to go out for a tunneling contract. You might remember that there is a launch shaft currently in place at Kiel at the moment, so the construction of this has actually started. If a contract is awarded in the spring of this year, I think it's about a 4-year, sorry.
2 years to Eglinton and Allen.
So it's about 2 years to get the tunneling to Allen, and then we need another tunneling contract to go further east.
When will the line be operational? As far as we know,
So the
Laird to Black Creek, fully operational.
So the schedule for the Eglinton Crosstown line has been set by Metrolinx at 2020.
2020. And of the $8.4 billion that's been allocated in funding, was that costed out in 2009 dollars, 2012, 2018?
Yeah, those are unescalated 2010 dollars.
Okay, is there anything to prevent us from re-examining what should happen either east or west of the proposed buried line in 2020 and changing our mind at that point in time?
Well,
Especially based on what happens from a planning point of view in terms of development over time.
are you saying? So I'm not sure I understand the question. I think what's
My question is, why does that decision as to what happens east of Laird and west of Black Creek need to be made today?
So we need to know the alignment of the whole line. Even the tunneling contract that we're going out to the market with in the spring, which is the west part of the line, it's important that we understand what's happening in the east end, so the alignment and all the grades related to that are fixed, so that we're not actually designing and building something that won't work to the east. Because the grades that a subway or an LRT or any mode are limited, we have to know what mode we're operating. We have to know whether it's underground or at grade. So we don't have the time to say, let's build it, and then we'll worry about the east or the west end later. We really have to fix those things now, and especially when you're tunneling, you don't have the opportunity to go back and rebore that tunnel.
Okay, but just separating out the notion of alignment versus actual costing, because when people start saying, well, we're going to save a whole lot of money if we go this way rather than some other way, are you actually costing those alignments or different alignments?
So we've spent a lot of time working with Metrolinx on what we believe the appropriate alignment is for Eglinton, Scarborough, Crosstown, and so we do know those costs and what the difference is between those two options. Yes.
And that's measured in 2009 dollars.
It's in 2010 dollars, yes.
2010 dollars, and that's supposed to be $8.4 billion, correct?
So the total cost of the project, the total of $8.4 billion is the committed money from Metrolinx for that whole corridor from Jane to Scarborough City Centre, and obviously a portion of that is between Jane and Kennedy, another portion of that is up to Scarborough City Centre. So that's all been costed at $8.4 billion. That's the money that Metrolinx is prepared to spend.
Okay, and if at the end of the day it costs $12 billion to do that, what happens to the Finch LRT?
Well, I think what we're all trying to do, including staff, is come up with a plan that makes sense, that's affordable. You don't create a plan like this and actually build one line and wait and see if you have any money later. You do enough work to be satisfied that that is a reasonable cost estimate, that it can be done at that price, and you know how much money you have left over to do other things.
And my final question, Madam Chair, is that if we're going to cost something out and we don't worry about whether we have the money or not, why would we not put in the best system that makes the most sense from a long-term planning point of view?
So I think it's fair to say that we know how much money we've got from Metrolinx. We've done enough work to satisfy ourselves that the work can be done for that kind of money. We've also done enough work to be satisfied that the 5 and 10 plan, the LRT Metrolinx plan, will meet the needs not only for 2031 but for 2050 also.
Councillor Crisanti, questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Questions, I guess, to Mr. Webster. But just to be very clear, what, in your opinion, would move people faster? For example, on Finch Avenue, we have a terrible problem on Finch. An LRT or a underground subway? What will get them from point A to point B in a more efficient and quicker way?
So the best mode and the fastest mode for any corridor is a subway. But you don't make your decision on which technical...
Well, thank you. Thank you. No, I got my answer. That was my answer. Thank you. Mr. Webster, a few months ago, I requested a report to address the current problem on Finch Avenue. 3 options came back, tentative options. One of the options was to have bypass queue lanes, I believe it was called, that, and it spoke specifically to the fact that it would move people almost as fast or as fast and as quickly from point A to point B as an LRT would. Do you remember that option, Mr. Webster?
I do remember the queue jump lane option and the cost related to it. I don't remember saying in the report that the speed would be comparable to an LRT.
Okay, that was there. By the way, we're still waiting for that report to come forward. Would you know when the follow-up report with more detailed information on those options will be coming forward?
Yes, sir. That report is outstanding. The author of that report had a stroke. He is recovering. TDC staff are taking over that assignment. It's going to be in 2 months' time. I think that report will be before you.
Okay. And just one final question. How many cars would a streetcar or an LRT remove off the roads? Do you have any stats on
I
that?
can't remember off the top of my head. I can look that up and share that with you later, but I don't have that at my fingertips.
Okay, let me put this one other way. Would you agree that, or what would move more cars off a road, potentially, above ground streetcars, LRTs, or a subway?
So when you look at a corridor, I think it's important to remember the basic planning principles. When you look at a corridor and you look at employment, you look at travel patterns, you look at growth into the future, you look at what percentage of people are going to be on transit, and you project out 20 years or 40 years, and you size that mode to meet that future demand. You're always going to attract more people with a faster service, with an underground and exclusive right-of-way. The question really is that what you need? So you don't build more of an asset than you need on the Finch corridor, if that's what your question.
How many more cars would be moved off the road, a subway or streetcars or LRTs?
So a subway would attract more people and would get more people out of their cars, and ridership would increase more generally than any other mode, just like any other city in the world. Subway is the most popular mode. It's the most expensive. It should be built when it's needed, and it shouldn't be built when it's not needed.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Thank you.
Councillor Palacio, questions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Webster, I have a few questions for you. And this is related mainly to St. Clair. How much over budget was the St. Clair line?
So the TTC budget, the St. Clair project was a combination of a TTC project and a City of Toronto project. And if you go back to the beginning of the project and scope out what TTC's work was, we were pretty much on budget with our portion of that work.
What was the initial amount and the final
The
amount?
I think the initial amount of the TTC scope work was $68 or $9 million, something like that.
And the final number?
The final number for our portion of the work and the City of Toronto work was, I think, about $105 million.
So it would be fair to say that was over 100% over the budget when we compound all the additional costs.
No, you're comparing apples to oranges, Councillor, with all due respect. If you're able to isolate the original TTC scope and
Thank you. I have further questions. What was the effect of the St. Clair construction?
Madam Speaker,
my time.
Madam Speaker, if the person has a question that he wants answered, especially if they're disparaging, the staff should be able to answer the question and not get interrupted by the questioner if he doesn't like the answer. And that's what's happening. And that's not fair.
You are the architect of the total disaster there, so
Councillor,
Madam
okay,
Speaker,
hold on.
personal privilege.
Okay, first of all, Councillor Mihevik, thank you very much, and remember that when you ask your questions as well. So I'm going to put everything on hold until because there's too much noise in the council chambers. And if this continues, we're going to recess and ask everyone to leave the council chambers. No, I've got everybody on hold right now, Councillor Mihevik. Councillor Mihevik, point of personal privilege.
Yes, Councillor Palacio insinuated, or actually said, that the overruns were, frankly, were my fault. He knows, as well as I do, that cost on St. Clair that was $30 million that was changed in scope was due to hydro undergrounding that he actually advocated for as much as me.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. I'm holding your time. Just holding your time. No, I'm just going to wait. Okay, everyone ready to continue council? Okay, Councillor Palacio.
Mr. Webster, my next question is, what was the effect on the St. Clair construction and on local business and homeowners overall?
What was the effect on St. Clair with regards to?
With regards to the construction on local business and the homeowners.
So there was quite a bit of pushback from homeowners and businesses with regards to the impact that the construction occurred. There was a legal dispute on the project, which actually held the project up for about a year. So there was a lot of upset from the people affected by that during the construction of that project.
Would it be fair to say that hundreds of businesses lost their business, and as a result of that, hundreds of businesses are struggling to survive?
So I can't comment on the numbers of businesses that were affected, that moved or shut down, but it's fair to say that the project was longer for the reasons I said, and it did affect a lot of people.
It would be safe to say that the same kind of damage would happen on the Eglinton line if it's going to be above ground and not underground. What's your opinion on that, Mr. Webster?
So we've learned a lot about the St. Clair project, and we wrote a report about lessons learned on St. Clair. We talked about public consultation as being an area that we can improve on. We talked about project management, and we talked about scope, and that relates to the project management part of it. So we've learned a lot on St. Clair. We've got a good team of people in place with regards to the LRT plan to consult with the public, to involve them, And we've received excellent feedback about all the work to date. So I'm optimistic that that will continue throughout the construction of the project.
A follow-up to your response to that. With regards to the lessons learned on St. Clair, one of the recommendations, and that was with that report, is that there was a problem with the lack of management.
There was a
problem with the lack of management, that no one was actually in charge of it, and that created is the tremendous problem in
Yes.
with that project.
Yes, there was project management problems, and that was the leadership of the project. You're absolutely right. It was a combination of a TTC and a city project combined into one, and we as an entity, a city and TTC, did not manage that project well. That allowed things like scope creep to occur and made the project very challenging to manage. So you're right, there were problems in project management.
Great. And now, was the St. Clair project envisioned to be the prototype in terms of public transit that could be used not only in City of Toronto but all over North America? And we're supposed to be very proud of that project. As a result, it ended up being a total failure, as noted by the media and acknowledged by all. What are your response with regards to that, and how that can relate to the Eglinton line?
Right. So we don't consider St. Clair a failure. We consider St. Clair to be a success from a ridership increase, from a service reliability perspective. I think it's important to remember that St. Clair is like Spadina 510, the Harbourfront 509. LRT and the Metrolinx 5 and 10 plan is going to have higher speeds, slightly wider station spacings, and will be different than St. Clair. It will be faster and more reliable for those reasons.
Now, with regards to the speed that you just mentioned, on St. Clair, once again, what's the average speed on the streetcars?
I believe it's 15 to 17 kilometers per hour. I think I'm not positive, but it's in that range. It's faster.
I believe that's 15 kilometers. Now, what's the average on subways?
Subways are in the order of 30 kilometers per hour.
30 or 32?
Well, 30, 32, in that range.
Okay, that was your last question, Councillor Palacio.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question for the Chief Planner, Mr. Wright, and then a quick one for Mr. Webster. Mr. Wright, well, you and I are contemporaries, so I might be going back too far. But when I was a little girl, the Young Line ended at Eglinton. And up north of that, if I went up to the Fairlawn Cinema, there was a bunch of two-story stores and houses behind them, and it was that way all the way up to the countryside. It looks a lot different now. All of those tall buildings that I see from the 401 up to Finch and beyond, if I went to the OMB and looked at the decisions, would I see the development of subways being used as an argument?
If you're talking about the North York Centre, roughly, 401 North, that represents approximately 25,000 units of residential housing today, and has taken probably 25 to 30 years to come to fruition. So definitely the subway had an impact, but the sense of perspective is it takes a long time to get that kind of density, even with the subway in place. I think the big change was they actually put a station in the middle of all of that development, the North York Centre. So that is a very high intensity area. It is one of the most successful sub-centres, and that was all part of the Metro plan at the time, to have sub-centres. And it developed over a 25 to 30-year period of time.
Right. Takes a long time to get those development charges, but we'll have the development. So now, a subway or LRT, either way, we're gonna get some development and some development charges. I suppose the question then is, how does the process unfold? If we go into a neighborhood to talk to them about transit development, do we talk to them at that time about what buildings will be built? If we go to ask them, where should we put the line and where should we put the car house, is there a conversation about where should we put the 40-story buildings?
Well, there is. They're not always necessarily concurrent. As you may know, we just Council just approved a land use plan for Warden and Shepherd just at the Council meeting yesterday and the day before.
Yeah.
And that was took some time to work through with the neighborhood and with the local councillor, and will result in substantial density. We are embarked on a 2-year land use plan to plan the appropriate land use and density for the Eglinton corridor, and there will be a number of discussions with surrounding neighborhoods about the density that's anticipated. That will be a very involved process, and people must realize that we will be contemplating and eventually recommending for approval considerable density along that line.
Considerable density. Okay, and Madam Speaker, I have a question for Mr. Webster, but I think he's distracted. So, Mr. Webster, we're talking about new lines. I wonder if I could just take you back, though. In the last few years, something that's been a tough conversation in your operating budget is security. Are we today? Are we getting there? Are we providing enough funds for your dream security package, both above and underground?
Well, today we have a certain number of staff, and combining those with the Toronto Police Services Transit Unit, we have the minimum number of staff that we requested. As ridership grows and these plans expand, and as we get into proof of payment, we're going to need some more staff to do that job.
Going to need some more staff, more transit officers, more police officers. Is there a cost formula for providing security underground versus above ground? Which is more expensive?
So we have a plan. I mean, our security plan is based on the subway, and that asset, for the most part, that's what our staffing is based on. Toronto Police focus is more on the surface than we are. They do support us, and wherever there's an incident, I'm not sure I understand the question as to whether it's more expensive or not. We look at our coverage and zones, and we apply those resources as needed. Our focus is on the subway. That's our most important asset with the most people. So it does cost us more to secure the subway.
You're having trouble understanding. I've got a couple of seconds left. I guess what I'm getting at is we haven't solved is the province ever going to help fund operating? Do you need more money from them if we have more underground?
Absolutely. We need more money. When we build more transit, we need more money for operating. And unfortunately, transit doesn't pay for itself. So the operating budget goes up regardless of how efficient TDC is.
Question to the Treasurer. You've read the KPMG report?
Yes, I have.
For the Shepherd Subway, even with all of the financing tools that are identified, and with all the development, some of which you just heard about, it's still about $1 billion short of funding the project. Is that right?
It's as low as $800 million and as high as $1 billion.
About $1 billion.
Yep.
So in terms of that, the major building block in all this is tax increment financing and development charges. Is it true that this report contemplates increasing development charges on commercial and retail by about 40%? The standard now is about $104 a square foot. It's going to go up to about $147 a square foot. Is that correct? About a 40% increase on commercial development charges?
No, I don't think that's correct, Councillor. I'm going to ask Mr. Farag.
If you look at page 5 on the report, that's what it says.
It was a Spadina subway. It was part of that.
That being true, it also calls for increases on development charges on residential units right across the city. Is that not true?
Go ahead.
Yes, Councillor. Through you, Madam Speaker, the KPMG report suggests an across-the-board increase of development charges in the order of about $2,000 per apartment unit.
On every unit built in Toronto?
Correct.
Not just in the Shepherd corridor?
Yes.
Right. Okay. That increase will be passed on to consumers when they purchase those homes, right? Okay, and businesses as well when they construct new offices. Secondly to that, the tax increment financing is looking at leveraging tax increases about 20% on commercial and about 8% on residential in the transit corridors of Shepherd and Eglinton. We're going to leverage that for 50 years as a way of paying this off. That's the bulk of it. So taxes will go up above and beyond inflation with a 20% increase to the base for every business, and about an 8 to 15% for every house, depending on the proximity to the transit station. Is that not right?
No, I wouldn't characterize it quite that way. The taxes will be uniform across the city. We're only effectively utilizing the tax increment to the extent that there is growth in the corridors.
Right. And
But
that
the
growth
tax
is expected
rate
to be 20% on business taxes and 8 to 15% on residential, depending on whether it's single-family home or condominium, depending on the high growth or the medium growth scenarios.
again, the tax rate is across the board uniform across the
So even after we jack taxes on business, jack taxes on houses, add increases on development charges, even after we do all of that, there's still $1 billion short. Even after we do all the tax increment financing and all the DCs, it's $20 billion short. The other question I have is that the DCs and this TIF increment financing, but the DCs in particular, these DCs until 2062, development charges until 2062, every penny above and beyond the current charges, even with 2.5% a year put into it, every penny of the new development charges is dedicated to these transit lines. In other words, if you want to build Finch, there's no development charges available to you until 2062, unless you raise them again. Is that right?
Well, the model takes into account a 30-year time frame, so we're looking at development charges being utilized over the next 30-year time period.
Right. So there's no money for Finch for 30 years, no matter what you want to do there, unless you find new sources of financing. The next question is this. The report calls for about 6,794,509 new square meters of development. If the average 23-story building is about 15,000 square meters, that means about 450 new condos are going to have to be built in the 25-story range through these two corridors in order to accommodate the growth projections that still leave us $1 billion short.
Yes, I believe the assumption that's being used is about 1,600 units per year.
Right.
Over the
At
course of
211 units per building, assuming that the standard of about 1.75 people per unit, we're going to generate about 166,000 new residents in these two corridors. That's correct?
I think the
And the transit nodal split in this area is about 25%, so only about a quarter of those will be new transit riders. In other words, 40,000 people delivered between two different lines is all we're going to get in new residential development in these two corridors, and yet that's going to tie up every penny of capital for every other project, whether it's a swimming pool, a library, a fire hall, a police station, a community center, fixing roads. All of our capital, all of our new capital above and beyond the current development charge is going to be tied up in delivering 40,000 people to these two transit lines, and it's still $1 billion short. And if we make a single compromise on one floor of a building, let alone one entire building,
Councillor Vaughan, your question, and that's
we
your
make a
last
single
question.
compromise, the $1 billion gets bigger, doesn't it?
Hey, that's it.
No. Councillor
Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Questions for General Manager, TTC, Mr. Webster. The Vaughan Station, or the Spadina extension, will open in 2015. I believe that's
Yes, sir.
And what is the estimate number of increased ridership that will use that system coming southbound or northbound along the new stations as well as the existing stations?
I don't recall, Councillor. I don't have those numbers with me. I can get those numbers, but I don't recall the new riders for that.
So based on the current transit flow, those who are coming southbound with the desire to either get to the Yonge line or to Scarborough or to north up to Finch on the Yonge line or south down to downtown will have to get off at the Downsview station, take a bus across Shepherd, get back on the transit, take a subway to Don Mills, let's say, and then, I don't know, take a bus from there. Is that the advice we're giving to transit that want to move on a continuous loop from let's say, the northwest to to the southeast.
Right. So I think you're right. There's two options that customers have today if they're going from the northwest to, say, the northeast or the east part of the city, and that would be either to go to Downsview and take a path along the lines you said, or probably better is to go to Finch Station on the Yonge Line and then head east from there. So you're right. There are two options. You eventually get to the Yonge Line or cross the Yonge Line. You can start at Downsview or you can start at Finch.
So when commuters eventually see what's involved in moving on a so-called continuous loop, doing subway, buses, LRT, and so forth, will they throw up their hands, and I realize this might be a rhetorical question, and say, I'm going to drive. This is just not worth it.
Yeah. So the travel pattern that you're examining is the east-west flow across the top of the city. And we spent a lot of time modeling that and talking about that as an appropriate model with Metrolinx a number of years ago. And the conclusion was that the number of people that actually make that east-west trip across those corridors to which you mentioned is relatively small, and the travel pattern can be accommodated if the transfers are good. In other words, if you're going to get on a vehicle and get off at Don Mills and transfer at Shepherd Yonge and then continue west to your point, if there's no continuous rapid transit, then there needs to be good transfers in place. So the conclusion that was reached by all that work was that we needed to make sure the transfers were good as opposed to making another rapid transit link.
So theoretically, we open the new line in 215. We build LRT east-west from, let's say, Kiel along Finch.
Yes.
Is there a possibility that 7-8 years from now, you're going to be coming to us for $500 million for platform extensions down the Spadina lines because we can't move people east and west across Shepherd?
Yeah. So you're right. The first phase of Finch is indeed from Kiel to Humber College. The next phase, though, is to fill in that gap between Kiel and Yonge Street. So the 5 and 10 plan is just the first phase of that. The whole 4 priority projects would see LRT from Yonge Street all the way to College. So you're right. That gap would be closed by an LRT in the future should there be funding for it.
Well, I mean, are we expecting people to go from different transit strategy to different strategy? I've looked at a number of different models in other cities across North America and Europe, and they have a continuous loop where it's either a subway or raised LRT. I would think that between Downsview Station and Yonge and Shepherd that we continue the line as a subway.
Yeah, clearly that's an option, and that was part of the MOU plan. When the LRT network was envisioned and became part of the regional transportation plan by Metrolinx and shrunk down to the 5 and 10 plan, we did agree that there is a need for a network across the city of LRTs. We did look at that link to which you referred. The conclusion from a planning perspective was to have LRT from Yonge to Humber College as opposed to making that link. So you are making the argument there's a link there. The decision that was made was that link can be made for the few number of people that make it by having good transfers at the points where they transfer, and the investment along that corridor of rapid transit wasn't warranted.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson, questions?
Yes, I'm a councillor in the Eglinton Avenue area, so I'm trying to respond to my residents' inquiries about the transit city concept along the Eglinton Avenue area. So I've heard everything from the subway going down at Brentcliffe or Laird, which are very close, it going down at Leslie, it going underground at the DVPs. Could you walk me through exactly if the LRT came up onto Eglinton Avenue, exactly the path that it would take across the city going east?
So that work's not been finalized yet. The Eglinton crosstown corridor from Jane to Kennedy Station is underground from Kiel to Laird, as you note. It's then at grade to Kennedy. The engineering from Laird over to Victoria Park has not been finalized. We're looking at it from two perspectives, from an engineering point of view and from a cost point of view. There are a number of bridges that have to be navigated through or under. Whether we can operate at grade or not, whether we need to be underground, whether we need to rebuild some bridges, hasn't been finalized yet. There are a lot of options on the table, and it really does come down to, from an engineering perspective, what are our feasible options and what's the least cost. So, I'm not in a position to say it'll be this way or that because we haven't finalized that yet.
And how would you address the Don River?
Same thing, exactly the same issues from the west of the Don Valley Parkway to the east of the Don Valley Parkway, those steep grades, all those issues need to be addressed in exactly the same way. I think the east side is a little bit more clear than the west side, but that hasn't been finalized. So it's clear that the east side will be more likely at grade. The west side will be if it makes sense and if it's cost effective, and we're finalizing all that.
And I've heard, maybe rumor or not, but some of the engineers from both TTC and Metrolinx actually feel it's a nominal cost to go underground all the way to the DVP. And from a logistical, technical standpoint, is there any truth in that rumor?
No, that is clearly one of the options. We're looking at whether or not that makes sense to continue underground.
So if council determined today or in the next few weeks that we wanted it actually to go underground at Brentcliffe or Laird, that might be overturned by the engineers' work, their assessment, and what's most productive.
Yes, I would ask that whatever you do today, that you do not dictate the method of construction. I'd like you to leave it to the engineers to recommend what we think makes most sense at a reasonable cost. You're quite accurate, and it could be at grade, it could be underground, it could be on a bridge or a viaduct. There's a number of options. The one that you mentioned is not a rumor. It's an option on the table, and I would just ask that whatever comes out of this meeting today, that it not prevent us from doing what we think is the right answer.
Okay, thank you for that. Environmental impacts. Again, I'm really trying to learn all the issues around this. LRT versus subway, the environmental impacts. Do you have any information for me around that?
Well, we did an environmental assessment for this corridor. You examine groundwater issues, you examine traffic issues which are on the street. There are environmental impacts, whether it's subway or LRT. I think if you list all the factors that affect either one of those modes, you'd have to put whatever weight you think might be on those. All that work has been done, and an EA was approved by Council a number of years ago.
Okay, thank you. And cost-benefit analysis. Has there ever been one done to compare Transit City to the non-binding MOU? So talking about design perspective, by an objective third party, has that ever been done, given these two ideas and concepts have been in play over the last few years?
No, it has not.
And lastly, what are the life cycle costs? And you may have answered this already, so pardon me if I'm asking again, but the comparison between the LRT and the subway, what are the life cycle costs?
So it's more expensive to maintain a subway asset. We answered some questions earlier about operating costs. They go up regardless of what mode we choose. The subway is a significant asset, being a tunnel and all the infrastructure related to it. So it is a more expensive asset to maintain.
Thank you. Councillor de Beermaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to our TTC staff, just to make sure I frame my arguments and what you're going to say to us. There are basically two options out there right now. Would you agree? One is the council-approved Memorandum of Agreement, which is parallel to Councillor Stintz's motion today. And there's another option out there that says we should bury the Eglinton LRT underground. Would you agree those are sort of the two options we have as a frame of reference?
So I'm not sure I would explain them like that, but you're right. There's a 5 and 10 LRT plan, and there's an MOU that is underground.
Okay, and of those two options, if we were to put surface transit on Eglinton, Finch, and Shepherd, if we don't spend the money to dig the big hole along Eglinton, would we save about $2 billion if we don't tunnel along Eglinton?
So we're using $1.9 billion, but in that order of magnitude, yes.
So if we save that $2 billion and build the light rail on Eglinton, Shepherd, and Finch, how many people would benefit that? How many more people would come onto the TTC?
135 people more.
Yeah. So when you compare those two options, it's around 135,000 more people as compared to undergrounding the east end of Eglinton.
So if we only have $8 billion to spend, would you recommend we spend it in a way that maximizes the benefit for the greatest number of people?
So yes, I would. We start differently, and we look at the corridor from a planning perspective. We say what mode matches that corridor, what does that cost? That then results in money left over, and if there's money left over to build LRT on Finch and Eglinton, then we would support doing that.
That's right. And if we do that, we benefit 130,000 more Toronto taxpayers.
That's correct.
Immediately, very shortly, because we can start immediately, correct?
That's correct.
And in terms of cars, because I drive my car along Eglinton sometimes my bike, but when I'm driving my car in Eglinton and people say, Glenn, Eglinton Avenue is jammed up, if we compare these two options, we can invest that $8 billion in a tunnel, or we can invest it on light rail transit on Eglinton, Shepherd, and Finch. And if we do the light rail transit option, is it accurate from your environmental assessments that we would actually take 40,000 more cars off the road if we support Councillor Stints' motion? Is that correct?
So let me put it in terms of ridership, and then someone can help us with the math to get from, when you look at the LRT 5 and 10 plan, there's an increase of 11 million customers, ridership, per year. That's people that are diverting onto transit from other modes. So the travel patterns don't change, but people choose transit. So there's 11 million more people per year that will choose transit if LRT is built on Shepherd and Finch.
Okay, so if I can jump in because my time's limited. So I saw in your environmental assessment that 40,000 more vehicles will be off the road. So if we're concerned about less congestion, would you agree we should support Councillor Stints' motion because that gets more cars off the road than just an underground Eglinton line?
Well,
yes or no?
Yes, that's why we brought the EA forward, and we supported the evidence in the EA.
And I also saw in your environmental assessment, and I want to say, are you saying to us as council today, are you standing by the environmental assessment that says there'd be 50,000 tons less of carbon dioxide and air pollutants through the Stints plan versus the underground plan?
So all I can speak to,
your environmental assessment
all I can speak to is the EA, and we support the numbers that were in the EA.
So if we want 40,000 cars off the road and we want to say get rid of 50,000 tons of pollution out of the air, we should support the Stints plan. Is that correct?
Is that a rhetorical question, or you want me to comment?
Yes or no, because I've got less than a minute left.
So that's the way the numbers work. Yes, sir.
Okay. And in terms of taxpayers' money, is the Stints plan the financially soundest and most fiscally responsible way to invest that $8 billion, given these two options?
So
I've got less than 30 seconds.
So we say that the Metrolinx 5 and 10 plan is better value for money. Yes, sir.
And in those right now, if we go underground on Eglinton, am I correct to say that people, the over 150,000 people who live along Finch and Shepherd, get no improvements in mass transit? That they're stuck with buses, they don't get light rail, and they don't get subways? Is that correct?
All the money would be consumed on the Eglinton Crosstown project. We have to report back on improved bus service on Finch, and the Shepherd corridor is still under review in a separate way.
And if somebody moves deferral, do you?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The question I had, most of them were asked by Councillor Glenn DeBeer-Maker. I like to be more specific. So if we adopt the Bearing Hall subway, Eglinton, then how much money will be left after that?
So we don't believe there will be any money left. The allocation from Metrolinx, the $8.4 billion, we believe will be consumed by the Eglinton Underground plan consistent with the MOU.
So if that happens in terms of environment, Councillor Glenn DeVere raised the question, then the people will rely more on driving cars, right? And increase the pollution, all that thing will happen?
Well, there wouldn't be any money to add any more rapid transit throughout the city unless we come up with some more money through some other means. So people will continue to use the TTC until it gets filled up, and they'll make other choices.
Okay, I heard and I read different numbers in the newspapers. So if we switch from the original LRT plan to the Eglinton line subway, then we have to pay fine 65 million, some say up to 100 millions. What's the exact amount, do we know, that we have to pay for all these people made the contract and work done previously, et cetera, et cetera?
So the final amount hasn't been determined yet. There's been numbers anywhere from $48 to $65 million for sunk costs. What Metrolinx has been clear on is the contract with Bombardier for the LRT vehicles would also be affected, and there'd be additional sunk costs on top of that. So that number has not been finalized yet.
So it could even go over 100 million then. Depends on what kind of subway trains we use. Or
So it is certainly going to be a bigger number than we've been stating publicly today because it does not include the vehicle costs. So I wouldn't be surprised if it did. But that number is a Metrolinx number, and it's not a TDC number.
So if it happens, I hope it doesn't happen, then who paid the fine? Is Toronto taxpayers through the property tax, or is it from the Metrolinx through that and then from province? Maybe we talk about same taxpayers, but I don't want to see that the city bill the taxpayers through the property tax. So who should be responsible?
So I don't know if that's a question for TTC or not. All I can say is Metrolinx's position in correspondence with the TTC and the city is they've indicated that that would be a responsibility of the city. We have not actually been billed yet, as I understand it, so that issue has not been addressed or resolved.
Okay, another question I have. I don't know whether you had the chance to read the Councillor Steen's motion. Motion number 5 is recommending that the extension of LRT, formerly current SRT extension from Scarborough Town Centre to Melbourne Town Centre, and this is great news. And if it happens, do we know a rough figure how many more people could use public transit rather than driving or relying on bus, etc.?
Yeah, so we do know that number. When we did the original regional transportation plan with Metrolinx, where it included 8 LRT corridors, we had numbers that indicated that ridership would increase on that corridor. If LRT was put up to Shepherd and then into Melbourne Town Centre, there would be increased ridership. People would shift onto that higher order of transportation because it would be more attractive. So from a transit perspective, it would get people out of their cars, but I don't have that number with me today.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cho. Councillor Ajameri, questions? Just one moment, okay?
If we defer the item today, would we be able to obtain any new technical information at all?
Well, we've spent many years working with Metrolinx on the regional transportation plan, and some time prior to that, of course, in developing a light rail network. So I believe it's fair to say that we all understand the issues. We know what we've examined, and I'm not sure what else would be gleaned from further review.
Thank you. My next set of questions are about Eglinton specifically. When did we start digging the tunnel for a subway on Eglinton?
So we had a launch shaft construction, I believe, middle of last year, and that's where you...
I'm sorry, I said subway.
Oh, the original Eglinton subway?
Yes.
So in the mid-'90s, there was a construction project of an Eglinton subway, and so, yeah, somewhere in the, 93, 94, somewhere in that time frame.
And how much of this was done? How much of the tunnel was dug?
So we spent, we actually never got to the point of actually buying and using tunnel boring machines, but there was major construction underway with regards to a launch shaft, and some other work was being done in terms of moving some utilities. We did end up spending about $80 million worth of effort on the Eglinton subway.
Okay, so is that $80 million that was spent, does that include the $80 million that was spent to fill in the hole?
Yeah, so the number of $80 million includes the cost of the construction, the cost to fill the hole in. We call that sunk cost. The subway was never built. Obviously, it's the money we spent, so that money was simply lost.
Okay, so that's what's meant by sunk costs.
Sunk cost is money that cannot be recovered because the plan has changed or we've stopped the plan or something like that has happened.
Thank you. My last question is, the subway that they're building in my ward now, is that the same subway that I voted for in the 1980s?
So the TYSSE, Toronto York Spadina Subway Extension, came out of a Network 2011 plan from 1986, and it is the same subway that was wrecked many years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I think you're wonderful.
Thank you.
Do you think you're wonderful?
Councillor Parker, questions?
Some questions to City Finance staff, and this may cover some ground that we've already touched on, but I just want to be sure about a few points. I'll call it the MOU proposal, suggests financing a large component of the project through tax increment funding, TIFs, and development charges. Just how much of the city would be affected by the proposed TIFs and DCs?
The TIF zone for the Shepherd subway extension is, I think it's 800 meters on either side of Eglinton along the entire line, along the RT line, and along the Shepherd, proposed Shepherd extension. So it's a significant part of the city.
Okay, and how long would the financing package be in place under the model that is recommended?
Well, the TIF zone would be for about a 50-year period in the study in KPMG's study. That would be 50 years. And I should mention that the DCs would be citywide.
The DCs would be citywide?
Citywide.
And what kind of development would we require in order to generate the returns that the proposal suggests?
In terms of numbers?
Yeah.
So I think in terms of residential units, I think it's about 1,700 per year on average. And the, sorry, I do have it. Here I got it. So on an annual basis, 1,700 unit residential units, 250,000 square feet of office, and 60,000 square feet of retail annually on average.
So that's what we would need to realize in order to generate the revenue that the funding model anticipates.
Yes.
Okay. And I understand that still leaves us with a funding gap. What's the gap that we are then left with?
Depending on the model, it's anywhere from 800 million to almost $1 billion.
Thank you. To TTC staff, if your assignment is to put rapid transit through a tunnel, what's the preferred vehicle, an LRT vehicle or a subway vehicle?
So a subway type vehicle is the preferred vehicle. We don't recommend an LRT underground for the length that it's currently proposed in the MOU.
And why is that?
Because an LRT vehicle is a low floor loading. You don't need to have low floor loading when you're underground. The most efficient and fast loading is level floor loading, like a subway or a mini subway system. The LRT has engineering costs associated with low floor that don't need to be spent. It's a narrower vehicle. You have less customers per square foot per length. Stations are more expensive because the car is longer for the similar capacity. It's just not a very, it's also designed to have, an LRT is designed to have crash worthiness from the side. You don't need that, so you're spending money on that. It's simply the wrong vehicle. If a decision is made to have a fully grade separated underground consistent with an MOU, then an LRT is the wrong vehicle. It should be a subway vehicle or a mini subway vehicle.
What costs more to buy, an LRT vehicle or a conventional subway vehicle?
An LRT vehicle is more expensive.
Now, you've been operating, we've all been operating, whether we knew it or not, under a binding Memorandum of Agreement, an MOA, of some years ago that presupposed LRTs on Finch West and Shepherd East. If we don't go ahead with that, we're going to need buses for those lines. Does the TTC budget include the cost of buses for those lines?
So we've had to change our capital budget to include more buses. So if the Metrolinx 5 and 10 plan for LRT networks is approved, then your bus fleet shrinks. If we don't have LRT on Finch and Shepherd, then we're going to need more buses. So there's no question that if you shift to LRT, your bus fleet shrinks. If it does not, then you need more vehicles.
Do we have money in the capital budget now to buy the buses we would need to serve Finch West and Shepherd East?
So we would need to add some buses to accommodate approval of an MOU plan.
Thank you. Councillor Menon Wong.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification. Did you say subways cost more than LRTs?
Yes, the actual, I think the question was related to operating costs, and obviously the actual cost to build a subway is more expensive than a net-grade network. The actual cost to maintain a subway is more expensive as well from an operating cost point of view.
Subways are more expensive. Okay, so you say subways cost more. So I'm looking at the Toronto Transit Back on Track. I'm looking at page 48. It says annual operating costs of the LRT in 1992 were estimated to be more than double that of a subway, $55 million versus 26. Vehicle costs higher, $554 million versus 165. Storage costs higher, $235 million versus 150. And property acquisition costs higher, $133 million versus $60 million. Do you care to comment on that?
No, those aren't my numbers or my report. I can't comment on it. I have a copy of that report. I haven't reviewed it. All I can say is it costs more to build a subway and it costs more to maintain a subway compared to LRT or LRT at
That was the 1992 environmental assessment done by the City of Toronto. Let me ask you this. You were copied on an email dated February 7th. And it says, and this is from Mr. McQuaig, Bruce McQuaig. It says, as you are aware, the province and Metrolinx will need to demonstrate ownership and control in accordance with the applicable accounting rules under the Public Sector Accounting Board in order to amortize its investment in transit projects. Do you believe the project that you're preferable to will meet those rules that Metrolinx is talking about?
So when the Metrolinx Act was put in place, and those words of own and control were put in the Act, and as you've just noted, consistent with the email, letters were sent to us consistent with that, which made it very clear that the province of Ontario supported an LRT network, but in order for them to properly finance it, which means borrow money against it, they need to pay that back over a longer period of time. And in order to do that, from an accounting perspective, they needed to have an accounting treatment for ownership and control.
You didn't answer my question.
So the Metrolinx
Sorry, just to be clear, Madam Chair, because I don't have a lot of time.
Okay,
Does,
if I can-
does the plan that he is preferring, the plan that's being put forward, does it meet, in your opinion, does it meet the accounting rules? Does it meet the legislation rules in terms of amortizing? Can the investment be amortized? Does the asset have to be owned?
And I'm asking staff if they can please answer the question that was asked.
So the answer is yes. We had a 5 and 10 plan with Metrolinx. The Metrolinx Act didn't change from 2 years before that to the vision of that Act. The money applied to those corridors would be accounted in the same way.
So, just to be clear, so you're saying the answer is yes, it does meet those rules?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Finch LRT, Shepherd LRT, Eglinton, Scarborough.
The answer
yes.
is yes, Councillor Minnan-Wong.
Okay. Do the assets have to be owned by Metrolinx?
Yes, they do.
So these other lines that you're talking about, are they going to be owned by Metrolinx?
Metrolinx will own the vehicles, the yards, and the assets.
What about the track? What about the track?
So there's some discussion between the City of Toronto and Metrolinx in terms of the actual infrastructure, who owns the right-of-way, the street, some of those kinds of things. I don't know if that issue has ever been resolved between those parties, but it's very clear that in order
you're saying
for
that's unresolved, the track?
I
It's going to cost money. It's going to cost lots of money.
I need to defer that to the city, for the city to talk about that issue of ownership. But it's very clear that in order for Metrolinx to fund the 5 and 10 LRT network, they need to own and control the asset.
They have to own and control the asset.
And the issue of what does ownership means, it clearly means vehicles, it means the infrastructure, the yards and so on. And I will defer to the city to talk about the actual right-of-way and the trade-offs of property and all that, how that all works out.
So let me ask you a few more questions. I don't know and I'm just asking quickly. These are Councillor Crisanti had these questions. It's a courtesy on his behalf. Do you remember the estimated costs for enhanced bus service using the bypass lanes on Finch?
I think it was in the order of $48 or $50 million.
Thank you. Do you remember how long your staff said it would take to build?
I don't remember. We'd work with the city on that a couple of years, I guess, if there's money for that. 2 or 3 years, probably.
So what's the cost difference between this and putting the LRT on?
Well, the LRT provides a higher order of transit, and it's a significant increase in ridership. The Q-jump lanes will accommodate the existing people better and attract a bit more ridership, but there's no significant improvement in the quality of the ride or the ridership gain. The LRT's intent was to address up to 3,000 customers per peak direction.
Okay,
the Q-jump lanes won't do that.
Right. Thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Milchin.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker, to the Chief General Manager of the TTC. Based on the engineering that is ongoing on the Eglinton Crosstown line, what amount of money do you think would be left over if a decision were made to go above ground in the east section of Eglinton, regardless of, where that starts, based on the engineering advice?
Yeah, so we think it's in the order of about $1.9 billion. We're using the same number that Metrolinx used in their presentation of earlier this week. Obviously, we're still in discussion with Metrolinx on the project scope and budget, but it could be up to 1.9. It could be less than that.
And what is the range? Like, you have to have some kind of estimate.
Well, it's at least $1 billion. We've said $1 billion to $1.5 billion. 1.9 might be a little bit high. It might be more in the order of $1.5 billion. Those numbers are all being finalized.
The Finch West, Shepherd East sections, and the SRT conversion, beyond what might be included in Eglinton, how much is all of that likely to cost?
So I think Finch West is about $900 million. Shepherd East is about $1 billion. The SRT from the Scarborough City Centre Station to Shepherd is about $300 million. And I can't remember from Shepherd up to Melbourne Town Centre. I'm going to say in order of another $200 to $300 million.
So it's fair to say today that it's conceivable that within the current funding envelope we would not be able to build everything. Finch West, Shepherd East, Eglinton Crosstown, that there might very well be a shortfall.
Yes, I think with the money left over, if Eglinton East End goes at grade, to do some of that, but the scope that you identified, I don't believe there'd be enough money to do all of that.
Okay. If I were to ask you which should be a priority, Finch West or Shepherd East, if you could only build one, which one would you build?
We'd build Shepherd East first, and then Finch.
Okay. And the costs related to providing vehicle yards for the LRT systems for Finch, Shepherd, what would the cost for those yards be?
Yeah, so so the Finch yard's a little bit more straightforward. We would have a small yard at the northwest corner of Finch and Jane. I believe that's in the order of about $250 million. It would accommodate all of Finch and some of the Jane cars. In terms of Shepherd, there'd be a yard at Conlins, which is east of Morningside. It is a larger yard, and it's a more expensive yard, maybe in the order of $300 million. It would accommodate all of Shepherd, all of the LRT, and some of the Scarborough-Melbourne line if it's built. But it's a bigger yard, and it's somewhat more expensive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to turn our minds again to what some of the potential sunk costs are in this whole debacle. So if this council today were to not make a decision and you were to proceed with planning and building the Eglinton Crosstown completely underground, what are the costs associated with that? Those things that you call sunk costs, burnt money, related to canceling the other projects.
Well, if we stay and continue to design and build the Eglinton Crosstown line consistent with the MOU, then the sunk costs that we've already incurred for lines related to Finch and Shepherd and vehicle-related costs would be unchanged. We would obviously be in a position to identify Shepherd and Finch costs. The vehicle, once this plan is finalized, the vehicle order would then be finalized, and there'd be a vehicle sunk cost penalty added to that infrastructure cost.
Yeah, for example, just focusing in on Finch for a minute, it was my understanding that somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 million was spent just doing the environmental assessment and some of the planning and engineering work on Finch Avenue. Would that be fair?
Something in that order of magnitude.
But that wouldn't include the acquisition of the lands of that car house you just talked about, right?
So there's been some money spent on Finch for preliminary design, EA work, and some minor design work. I don't think we've spent money on the property yet, but I can't remember. But all of those costs have been accumulated to a number somewhere between $48 and $65 million.
Okay, but if let's say the lands for the car house were acquired by Metrolinx, that number that you're talking about wouldn't include whatever millions of dollars would have been spent on those on the car house lands on Finch.
Well, yes, it would, although if we have bought money and if that's part of the sunk cost, presumably an argument we've made that asset could be sold and we might be able to recover some of those sunk costs.
But if for example, you weren't able to recover all of the monies that you paid for the lands, then somebody would have to swallow that sunk cost, right?
Well, that would be a sunk cost that would have to be covered by someone.
Okay. So let's say hypothetically that this council did not make a decision today. So you're saying on Finch, or let's call it the former Transit City Plan or the cancellation of that, you have a number that you say runs anywhere from $48 million to $80 million, potentially $100 million of sunk costs, burnt money, correct?
Yes, we've said publicly as high as 65 plus vehicle costs on top of that.
Okay, and that doesn't include any of the potential claims that might arise from the cancellation of the contracts to other losses that have been incurred by people.
So the $65 million that I've referred to earlier is would not include the vehicle costs to shrink the order. I'm not aware of what other sunk costs or penalties there might be of other claims. I'm not sure what they might be, but they're not included.
Okay. And let's say, for example, this council decided today not to make a decision and just simply defer the matter. What is it? And you don't have any direct authorization from this city council other than the memorandum of understanding between the mayor and Metrolinx and the province. What is it costing us monthly, for example, to proceed with redesign, re-engineering, re-environmental assessment of Eglinton Avenue? What's that costing us?
So we are to be clear, we are the service delivery agent on behalf of Metrolinx. All the money spent is being spent and paid for by the province of Ontario. We are currently spending some money on engineering and design work related to the underground section east of Laird, and it's in the order of $1 million to $1.5 million, maybe $2 million per month.
Okay, so we're spending $2 million per month, or have been spending $2 million per month since the Memorandum of Understanding was signed, and given that it's only one tax.
Okay, Councillor Perruzza, your time's up. Thank you. Councillor Fragadakis, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to staff. I'm not sure which staff, but whoever would like to answer it. How much did TTIL pay for the KPMG report on the Shepherd subway?
TTIL did not pay for the KPMG's report. The city did, and it was $175,000.
Okay, so the city paid $175,000 before taxes for a report on the Shepherd subway that has us $800 million underfunded. Yes?
Well, it's
at best.
The study is it's a preliminary financial study on whether or not we can finance this with growth revenues, and the answer is no, we can't.
Okay, so can you also then, I guess you'd be the appropriate person to ask, does the city have the authority to issue TIFs?
We would have to get regulatory and legislative authority from the province.
So currently we do not?
We do not for Shepherd.
So would the city get the education tax increments from the province?
The answer to that is no, and the study did not include the education portion.
Okay. Does the Development Charges Act allow the city to use development charge funds to support the issuance of bonds or other financing or borrowing schemes?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So before us then we have a report that has us $800 million underfunded, and we have impediments to the revenue tools that are actually before us. So we're way more than $800 million underfunded. In fact, we don't really have any funds because on page 22 of the report, it talks about some other revenue tools, zone-based tolls, expressway tolls, high occupancy toll lanes, parking sales tax, parking space levy, regional sales tax, employer payroll taxes, gasoline tax. Is that correct?
Yes, Council.
Okay, so then furthermore on page C2, does it not say that a tax on income is prohibited? Does it not say that a tax in the form of a vehicle sales tax is prohibited? That road pricing, no such regulations have been filed to date?
Yes, all those alternate revenue tools would require legislative change.
So at the moment we have nothing. We've paid $175,000 before tax for something which we have no authority.
What we paid for was a study to determine what would be available to us, giving revenue tools that are used in other jurisdictions.
Right, but it tells us that we don't have any money.
Well, it tells us that under those conditions, we would be short.
I would say
So-
significantly so. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's try to keep to the topic. Councillor Thompson, question.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I have a question, first question for transportation staff. I wonder if you could tell me or give me some ideas with respect to the number of daily vehicles that travel on Eglinton. I guess I'll take the Brentcliffe to Birchmount or Kennedy Road, please.
Through you, Madam Speaker, the 24-hour volumes on Eglinton in the vicinity of Don Valley Parkway is about 40,000 vehicles per day.
Isn't it
That's
a bit higher?
that's
40 to 50?
Again,
the range?
I just picked a section around Don Valley Parkway. To the west of Don Mills is about 49, approaching 50,000 vehicles
Okay,
per.
fair enough. And on sort of peak hours?
Okay, just one moment, Councillor Thompson. Put your time on hold. It's getting a little bit noisy in here. Okay, if I can have quiet, please. Okay, Councillor Thompson.
During the AM peak hour, again, the section east of Brentcliffe, it's about 3,700 vehicles per hour. And in the PM peak, the same section, it's about 39 vehicles per hour.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, through you to Mr. Webster, Chief General Manager of TTC. Mr. Webster, there's been much discussion about excess funds if, in fact, the Eglinton section, crosstown section from Brentcliffe to Kennedy is not buried, it's above ground, that there'd be savings. I think your numbers was 1.9. I think others have said about $2 billion. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, somewhere in that order of magnitude.
And could you tell me, with respect to the $8.2 or $8.4 billion that the province has committed to this particular project, is that money in the bank, or is that money to be gleaned or garnered from debt financing?
So clearly the province of Ontario has committed $8.4 billion, and they are borrowing that money in such a way that they are paying it back over a long period of time, and that's why we get into the accounting treatment related to them owning the asset.
Right. Now, I was going to ask you some questions you've addressed to Councillor Milchin, but can you tell me?
Sorry, Councillor Thompson. It's way too noisy in here. If I can ask the media, whoever's doing interviews up there, if we can keep it down. We're trying to conduct a meeting. Please. Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Mr. Walsh, I'm looking at a copy of the MOU, and on page 3, section 3.3, financial responsibilities and acknowledgement, 1, 2, 3, probably fourth paragraph down, it talks about the actual amount of monies that the province would allow the city to assume, which would be the residual amount. Do you know what that number is?
Yes, the Memorandum of Understanding says that if there's money left over from the Eglinton crosstown line, i.e. the line that would be underground to Kennedy, that the province would commit to forward $650 million. If the amount available was greater than that, the maximum they would contribute under the MOU is $650.
But we're planning to use the $2 billion as part of a great plan to build transit, are we not? Isn't that part of what the motion is that's in front of us today?
I understand, yes, as I understand the thinking.
I'm fine with that answer.
Okay, yep.
No, I'm fine. No, yes is good answer. Sorry. So there is great plans with respect to building a number of different lines, and we don't really have the funding component part in place. So I've got my answer with respect to that one. Can you tell me, Mr. Webster, with respect to clarity, because as I said earlier this morning, there's great confusion. Many residents in the City of Toronto seem to think that we're going to be building subways along Eglinton. Some think that we're building LRTs. Some think that we're building subways right across the city. So there is great uncertainty, and there's a need for clarity. What exactly are we building? Are we building combination, or are we building subways?
So I think the issue that needs to be better understood is the Memorandum of Understanding is an $8.4 billion program that allows an underground system from Keele or Jane all the way to Scarborough Town Centre Station versus a 5 and 10 plan, Metrolinx LRT plan that has LRT on 4 corridors. And
Now,
so I think
time for one last word. That's it? Am I done?
Yeah, no, your time's up.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My first questions are to city planning with respect to the development implications of the subway compared to LRT plans.
With respect to Eglinton and the corridor, we're doing a study, as I've mentioned previously, that will look at all the land use potential, and at the end of the day, we intend to bring in and propose as-of-right zoning. And so the differences in some respects are the distance between the stations, underground versus surface. There tend to be more stations on surface versus underground. But we would expect an increased level of development to occur along that line, no matter whether it's all underground or whether it's some underground and some surface, because it will be a higher order of transit.
So just to make it clear, with a subway, the stops are further apart. In that case, what type of built form predominates?
Well, you would typically anticipate a higher order of density at the station nodes and within 400 or 500 meters of the station. And where the circumstances allow, you would more likely have a mid-rise type of development in between the stations.
And for an LRT, an at-grade system, we could expect lower densities.
Well, not necessarily lower densities. That might be an outcome, but you're going to have higher densities than there are today because you're putting a higher order transit in. I think with an LRT on the surface, you have more stations. Therefore, you might have an opportunity for more intensification along the line at the nodes because there would be more of them.
So likely just a more even distribution of density rather than high rises at the nodes.
No, I think in some cases you will see taller buildings at the nodes.
But subways would predominantly promote high rises at those nodes.
Well, if you look at the existing experience that we have today, certainly you'd see more intensive development for a subway.
And how does this fit with existing avenue plans or city plans that are currently there? We'll have to revisit all the plans along both routes.
Well, Eglinton has a whole variety of zoning that's historical. We're revisiting all of that anyway. That has to be done.
But residents along any proposed subway route could expect significant increased density at particularly the nodes, but along the whole route.
Yes, I would say so.
Then to the TTC, with the densities what densities do subways require for operational purposes?
So subways can accommodate up to 30,000 passengers per hour per peak direction. You consider subways when you get into 15,000 passengers per peak hour or higher. Below that number, LRT in an exclusive right-of-way can accommodate the demand.
And based on the densities projected both on Finch West, Shepherd East, and along Eglinton, which transit form is most effective?
So LRT can accommodate the demand on all of those corridors currently to 2020, 2031, up to 2050.
Up to 2050. If we if we build a form of transit that doesn't meet, or we don't meet the density requirements to fund, what's going to happen?
Well, then you're spending money on an asset that's not required when a lower order of rapid transit will meet the demand. So from a planning perspective, once you understand what the travel demand is and what proportions on transit, you size your infrastructure and your vehicle related to it to match that demand. So all that work's been done, and all the corridors that are under review today, Eglinton, SRT, Shepherd, and Finch, all can be accommodated with LRT at grade.
And so, just so I'm clear, every year that we don't have those densities, we're going to be operating at a significant deficit. Is that along those lines? Till 2050, we don't have the densities there for subway.
So we've examined the densities for the foreseeable future. The corridor that's got the highest density is the SRT corridor. It needs to be in an exclusive right-of-way, which it is. Everything else can be accommodated at grade with LRT.
But for every year that we're operating at lower than the minimum capacity on those lines, we'll be operating at a deficit.
By a deficit, you mean we won't be able to cover our costs?
Yes.
Or? Yeah, well, that's certainly worse. There's certainly room for growth. If you build Finch, at which it currently demands is around 3,000 per peak hour per direction for 2031, it can accommodate more than twice that. So there's lots of room for growth, and
Okay, your time's
that's why
up.
you would build LRT.
Your time's up.